Hey, what's going on? My name's Noah and I'm a photographer from Melbourne in Australia, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to edit Like Withluke in Adobe Lightroom. So I only recently followed Withluke about 2 weeks ago, and I was scrolling through his feed on Instagram and he's got some amazing travel photography and landscape images on there. Even though every image on there is slightly different to the other and has a different kind of color palette, it all gels well and his feed looks very coherent. Just before we jump into Lightroom, I thought I'd say that there is different ways of editing a photo, and my process is probably different to how Luke would go about editing his images, and that's completely fine. But I thought I'd just teach you how I would go about editing this type of image and getting from a raw image all the way to the final edit to look like Withluke's. So I got this image sent to me by Jay Bevs, and he's got some awesome content on his page. It's an amazing image from Roy's Peak in New Zealand, and that is on my bucket list for next year. So hopefully when Victoria opens up a bit more to New Zealand, I'll be heading straight over there on a plane next year. Where I would start with this image is we want to really bring up the middle of the photo. It's very bright here, and you can notice that it's quite dark in the bottom half, bottom section of the image. So yeah, first we'll go to the tone curve and we'll just bring that up a little bit. We want to fade it a tiny bit, not too much. Bring up the mid-tones. Normally I would do an S-curve, but I'm going to play around with this a little bit till we get it right. So next I'm going to come up and I'm going to select the graduated filter, and what that does is it selects a part of your image and you can manipulate whatever you want really. So you can change the hue color if you want to, make it purple down there. You can change the exposure, which is what I'm going to be using this for. And what you can also do is you can go up to the brush tool and click erase, and you can also just highlight parts of the image that you don't want to be affected by that graduated filter, which is really good. So I'm just going to highlight a bit more of the path there and really make that stand out a bit more. So next I'm going to come down and I'm going to edit the colors and tones of the image. If we start with the background, it's pretty saturated, so we want to really bring that back and we want to change it towards a teal color as well. So go to the blue hue, go to the left a little bit so it's going towards the aqua. Saturation, bring that down a little bit, and we can come back and play around with that too. And same with the oranges in Luke's image, we want to add that to the grass. So where I would start is on the yellows, because that's really what this image is made up of. You can bring that towards the oranges, and already you can start to see a massive difference in that. If we zoom out, that's already looking really good. What I would do for this part of the image, I'd just bring up the highlights, because if you have a look at Luke's image, it's pretty desaturated at the top, but it's pretty bright too. So we're going to do that, bring up the highlights a bit and the white. Next, I just want to go to a bit more of the background, and I'm going to take away the purples from the mountainside. I'm probably going to change that to a blue, so it's really like a flat background. But then I'm also going to desaturate that as well. So next, I'm going to do a couple of adjustment brushes. I'm going to come up to my adjustment brush tool and I'm just going to paint over the hillside here. Don't paint in the shadowed area because you don't want to make it look unnatural. So once you've highlighted that area, you can then go and manipulate it, and I'm just going to bring up the shadows a tiny bit more just to add some more focus on that hillside as well. Now same with the background, we really want to brighten that up and bring the saturation down again. So I'm going to bring a graduated filter from the top. I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit, brighten it up. I'm going to also desaturate. I'm going to bring up the shadows too, because we want to make it a little bit more flat than what it already is. So I'm going to come down to my profile corrections, just going to enable those and remove the chromatic aberration. I'm not going to touch the vignetting because I like to manually do it with a graduated tool or an adjustment brush. I'm going to come back up to the presence section and I'm just going to bring the clarity backwards. You can see that it really fades it and gives that dreamy vibe, or it makes it really grungy. You can go either way. With Luke's images, his is a bit more claritized. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring it to the right a tiny bit to get a bit more edge on the grass and make it a little bit more grungy. We're going to come back to the tone curve, because if I have a look at the top of Luke's image here on the mountainside, it's actually very flat and ours is really pushing towards the highlights a bit more. So if I bring this highlight adjustment backwards, you can start to see it goes a lot flatter So you just need to play around with this because, you know, it's gonna make a big difference, you know, when you're sliding that around. And that is all done. I'm pretty happy with how the edit has turned out. So let's move on to the next images at Hopetoun Falls. So many different seasons and looks that you can get at Hopetoun Falls. I mean, mine was a day after it had been raining for 2 days in Victoria. And Luke's is, you know, midday, it's sunny, hasn't been raining too much. You know, I'm gonna start at the tone curve again, and Luke's image is very dark, so we're gonna bring that tone curve, you know, right down. There's some vignetting that is used on the image too, so, you know, we'll focus on that and do some in the adjustment brushes. But I'm gonna bring the highlights up because it's pretty bright in this part of the image and on the waterfall and just around here. Next, I'm gonna come down to my HSL color sliders. And you can see it's very desaturated on those greens, so that's where we're going to really start. We're going to bring down the saturation of pretty much all colors besides the yellow and the orange. We bring down the yellow a tiny bit, and we're also going to play with the luminance and actually bring the greens down too. Now I'm going to do an adjustment brush and actually paint over that and get it right, but we want to bring down the luminance on the greens to make them look very flat. If you have a look at that, it looks super desaturated already. The water on Luke's image is kind of aqua, so we'll come into the hue slider, bring the blue to the left. It's actually not going to do much because the water's so white. So what I'll do is just grab an adjustment brush, paint over the waterfall a bit, and then going to change the temperature to blue a little, and you can see that the blue starts to come through. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring the temperature up in the top half of the image and try and get it similar to Luke's. So we'll just bring the graduated filter down a little bit more. And I'm going to go into my brush tool and click erase, and then I'm just going to paint over the areas in which I don't want affected by our graduated filter. We want to play around with and make a fake kind of vignetting instead of using the tool, because that's going to affect the top of the image, which we don't want. So bring the graduated filter, drop the exposure down there as well. Instead of doing 2 other graduated filters, I'm just going to grab an adjustment brush and just paint over the areas which we want to make darker. Cool, so once you've done that, come back up to the tone curve. You can still see, if we zoom on this, it's pretty bright, and Luke's images are quite flat too. So we're gonna bring the highlights back down towards the right-hand side to make it a bit more flat. And we're gonna bring down the mid-tones as well to make that flat also. Again, Luke's also got a bit of pop to his image, so I'm gonna drag the clarity to the right a little bit to accentuate the leaves, make them stand out. Next, what I would do is I just grab an adjustment brush, because we've added in fake sun. It's too dark here, and the sun is coming from this direction. So what you can do is just paint over kind of the tips and the tops of some of the ferns that you can see there. Just bring up the exposure very slightly, and then bring the clarity to the right and really make that pop too. And because we're going to make this cool in 1 second, we just want to bring the temperature up as well on those leaves, just so they show that there's sunlight hitting that. So lastly, Luke's got a fade just down the bottom of the image. We're just going to bring the tone curve upwards, which will create a fade. And the higher you go, the more of the fade you get. Bring it to the left a little bit more so it's not affecting the shadows too much, and then bring that upwards to get that fade on there. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video today. We've got some awesome edits, and I really liked how they turned out, and I really do hope you learned something. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below and I'll be able to answer them. Leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you on the next video. Peace.